Okay, good morning. My name is Jesse Leal, and I am an AIB food safety professional with AIB International, and I'll be conducting this Developing IPM Strategies webinar today. So, depending on where you're from, welcome. Here at AIB, we do work literally all over the globe. I've worked here in the States, I've done work in Central South America, and it's been as far as Asia. But we also have people that do audits in other parts of the world, in Europe, Central South America, Asia, and obviously here in the States. So here at AIB, our mission is to positively impact the food supply chain by promoting food integrity, both through continuous education and helping our customers navigate the complexities of the food industry. So today, again, my name is Jess Leal, and I've been in the food industry going on 40 years. I've been doing it actually going on 39 years. So I worked in the industry for 10 years, and in that time that I worked in the food industry, I actually obtained my pest control license, and I've held it for the last 35 years. And I do a lot of consulting and a lot of teaching and lecturing on all of our topics, food safety, GMPs, allergens. And anytime there's one on IPM or pest control, they typically kind of reach out to me because first and foremost, it's kind of a passion I have. You know, talk a little bit more technical about some of the things that you don't think about from a pest control standpoint. So we'll be covering that today, and we'll be going into some specifics of some issues that you can have in and around your facility, whether it's a warehouse, whether it's a food plant, a beverage plant, and be sharing maybe a couple of stories. Obviously, I can't mention names, but I may be sharing a few stories of things that have occurred or that I've seen in the food industry, and some things that we want to be looking out for. And I already noticed that we had a couple of questions come in. I'll cover that at the end. We'll have a little time for a little Q&A, and I'll cover those couple of questions that already came in at that time, and hopefully that'll get the ball rolling and get you all to answer or ask some questions that you may have specifically from your plant, or something that you've dealt with from a pest control standpoint or an IPM standpoint. So let's get started. Okay, so sanitary operations from a regulatory stand. You know, a lot of people think, well, we just don't want to have pests in and around our plants because it's just, they're nasty, okay? And you know, it's just that UGG factor. Well, believe it or not, there's actually regulations that state that we should not have pests in and around our plant, okay? And a lot of people don't understand. They just think that, you know, pests get in the plant, it's a food safety issue. And that's actually kind of aligned with one of the questions that I got, and I'll cover that a little bit later. But actually pests in products or any kind of pests in food products would be more of a quality issue, okay? And I'm gonna kind of explain that. I mean, nobody's ever died because they found insects or insect fragments in their food products. I know nobody wants to see that, but it's actually more of a quality issue. Most people think it's a food safety issue. And there's a huge difference between food safety and quality. Quality, color, you know, things like that. But typically food safety means that it could cause an injury, illness, or death. And nobody has ever gotten sick or died from eating insect fragments. And I'm going to cover that when I get to my insect section as far as insect fragments. So regulated, you know, from a pest control standpoint, it's a regulated industry. As I mentioned earlier, I've been licensed for 35 years in the state of Arizona. And you can't just think one day, hey, I'm going to open up a pest control company, go out and start applying. No, you have to have a license by the state that you're applying, you know, pesticides and materials in. You have to have certain credentials, and because you're using pesticides that may be restricted use, you're using a rodenticide, you're using avicides for birds, and if you misapply them, if you don't use those correctly according to the label, you know, it could impact, you know, obviously people, and it can actually impact pets in and around the house or non-target pests. Okay, so it's very, very important to understand that the pest control industry is a regulated industry, which means you usually have to have a license and a lot of other things that go along with that. So, and I have to continue to go and get continuing education hours every single year to keep my license, to stay up on the new laws and regs and things like that. So no pests allowed in a food plant. Well, what does that mean? Okay. And I can tell you, in doing probably about 2,500 food safety inspections in about 10 different countries, this is probably one of the easiest things to find in a plant, okay? Because the rule doesn't say the insects have to be dead. It just says no the pest should be free from pests, okay? What does it mean that the plant should be free from pests? That means if there's any dead insects in there, that means they were probably alive at one time. How did they get into the plant? Does that mean they're coming from the products? Does that mean that from a sanitation standpoint, the plant's not doing what they're supposed to and it's allowing pests to develop, okay? So what we've done at AIB is we have a standard that we use for all of our food plants and beverage plants, and have about 8 standards that we have for literally every kind of facility out there. We have them for distribution centers, we have them for beverage plants, we have them for food plants, we have them for packaging plants, okay? Packaging plants such as that makes cardboard boxes and containers and film that comes in contact with food. So in those standards, all of the information is the same as far as in the sections. For instance, Section 4 is integrated pest management of the IB standards. So you will see that that is going to be the same, whether it's a distribution center or a food plant or a beverage plant. But not all of the things apply in that section. For instance, you may not have pheromone traps in a packaging plant. There's just no reason to have those. You may not use insect light units in a packaging plant. So not all of the things in there apply at every facility, and it's up to us as auditors to understand what applies and what doesn't apply in those facilities. The reason that we came up with these standards is we took the good manufacturing practices, we took the laws and regs, and I'm going to break that down here in the next couple of slides. And we try to make it easy for the industry to understand, okay? So in Section 4, we've broken that down. We've broken it down to where, what does it mean to, control insects in a plant, or what kind of control measures, can you have to control insects, to monitor insects? What about rodents? And that's what from 4.1 to 4.16 in that standard, or 4.15 rather, we break those down. And I have some numbers here of across the globe, some of the things that we found in our audits, okay? Some other things that apply to pest control or that impact it would be in other sections, such as if you look at 2.10. When it starts with the 2, that means it's in the maintenance section of our standard. It says effective measures to exclude pests from entering the plant. So in 2.10, we talk about that. That means that the door should be sealed. The windows should have screens. The door should be kept closed. But there's certain things in there that we have that also impact IPM that may be from another section, such as in Section 3, which would be cleaning, okay?
Hey, Jesse.
Yes.
A quick interruption. I think you paused the screen share. Could you check under the sharing tab real fast and make sure it's not paused? Because we're still seeing, I think, the first slide right now. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, it's fixed. I'm sorry. It looks good now.
All right. Sorry about that.
No problem. Keep going.
Let me go back real quick on. Let me see if I can go back on one. Nope, it's not allowing me to go back. So anyways, what I was talking about, I just got into this, folks. Sorry about that. But anyways, talking about our standards are broken down into 5 sections, and Section 4 is the IPM section, okay? And talking about a couple other sections in our standard, Section 2 is maintenance. And so you can see there, when it starts with the 2, that means it's in maintenance. If it starts with a 3, like 3.2, that means it's in cleaning. So Section 2 to 2.10 in maintenance says pest prevention. What that means is the plant should be sealed up. The seals around the plant on the doors and the dog plates and things like that should be in good condition. What are their brush seals or plastic or rubber seals to keep pests from getting into the facility, okay? And they're going to be wanting to get into the facility for several reasons. It might be water that they're looking for, it might be a food source, or it might be harborage. They're just looking to get out of the cold or get out of the heat. A couple other sections or items in the Section 4 is pesticides do not contaminate food. So we've broken it down to where the plants are monitoring what's being used in and around the plant. So in 4.6, pesticide application documentation. So myself as an auditor, I will go into the plant and I will make sure that they're using the correct pesticides based on what's allowed to use in a plant. They're not using it in areas they're not supposed to based on the label or the label directions, okay? 4.7 talks about pesticide control and so on. Again, there's like 15 different bullet points in Section 4 that talks about the use of pesticides, control measures such as tin cats or catch-alls, bait stations on the outside, pheromone traps. Okay. So what does IPM mean? Okay, so what is integrated pest management? I can say that when I first got into the industry, it was not called IPM, it was called pest control. And what that meant was when I worked in the snack food industry, I was overall in charge of pest control. And if we saw pests around a plant, ants or bees or whatever else, insects, we would call our pest control company, and they would come in and typically spray or use a material and whatnot. And it worked great for about a week, and then about a week and a half later, we saw pests again. So I ended up getting my license so that we could have a little bit more control, and I was there 24/7 and could take care of these issues. About 15 or 20 years ago, it started changing, and it changed to the term IPM. And IPM means, under the word integrated, is a systematic plan that brings together different pest control tactics into one program. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier with the section 2.10, is pest prevention, keeping the door sealed, things like that, cleaning the plant. The word pest means an organism that conflicts with the health and sanitary hygiene of an operation. And then management obviously is use tactics to eliminate conditions to promote or sustain pest populations. So this is the term now that all pest control companies and all food facilities use, is IPM, integrated pest management, because there's a lot of other programs that go along with or that impact pest activity in and around a facility. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I talked about the regulations, okay? So you have the good manufacturing practices for all food and beverage plants and warehouses. If you receive, handle, prepare, or process food, you have to comply with the good manufacturing practices. You know, what's interesting is I do a lot of lecturing. I do a lot of teaching. In fact, over the next 4 days, I'm teaching Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week on different topics. A lot of times in my classes, I will ask the students, to give me examples of GMPs. And what's interesting is they always give me an example from 117.10, which is personal practices. They don't understand that, believe it or not, pest control is a regulation. You have to comply with 117.35, which is sanitary operations of keeping the pests out of your plant. There's also other ones such as 117.20, 117.37, but it's important for the plants to understand there's a lot of different subsections of the GMPs. And unfortunately, as an auditor for close to 40 years, I see that, people just don't understand all of these different, regulations and things that we have to do. And this is why we have so many customer complaints and sometimes even recalls, class 1 recalls, such as what's currently going on in the meat industry. There's a lot of issues going on, with the problem there. It's not pest related, but something related to probably GMPs that were not complied with in the plant. So kind of back to here, 117 explains the word may. Very, very important. I want you to remember that, because I'm going to go into what does that word mean, may. And in the regulations, it's very important to understand exactly how the FDA interprets that. So the legal requirements, this is the past. So up to from 1938 to 2000 and roughly about 1959, there was this one rule, which was the 402A3. And what it stated was that, let me move this. A food shall be deemed to be adulterated if it contains in part or in whole any filthy, putrid, or decomposed substances, or it's otherwise unfit for food. So that's the way the rule stated earlier, to where you had to find, what it was saying is pretty much you had to find something in the food products in order for it to be considered contaminated, okay? And you know how difficult it is to actually find contamination, to find insect fragments in a plant, in products, or to find glass or metal or mold in food products. It's extremely difficult. In all my audits, I have found it a handful of times. Most of the time, it's a condition that exists, and that's what the problem is. So that's what we get into with this next section, which is 402A4, or this next law, actually. Okay. Now the law states you have to have, it's called reason to believe, okay? So the legal requirements, the current and in the future and in the past, 40283 and 40284. And this one, it says, a food shall be deemed to be adulterated if it has been prepared, packed, or held under unsanitary conditions whereby the food has become contaminated or whereby it may have become rendered injurious to health. What does that mean? Okay, let's see here. Trying to move my box here because it's right. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. So what does this mean to you? Okay, what does it mean to say that the product may have been contaminated? That means if you find insects in the plant, but you don't find them in the product, that's an issue. That's a violation. If you find mold in the product zone where it could fall into the product, that's an issue. You commit violation of 40284. If you find an oil leaking from a gearbox directly in a product, that could be that is in violation of the regulation. If you find birds flying around in your warehouse, there's a potential risk there. Birds carry a lot of diseases, rodents, insects. Okay. Here's one of the problems with pests in and around the plant. Now, not all pests carry bacteria and viruses, but you got rodents that carry viruses. You've got birds. You can tie salmonella to birds, bird droppings, and then you got cockroaches that come out of drains. Okay, we all know what kind of debris you can find in drains, and they're crawling in around drains. If they crawl on the food contact surfaces, that could be a major issue as far as cross-contaminating food contact surfaces. But here's just a small list of some of the issues that are related to pests. Everything from listeriosis to Campylobacter, hantavirus, which was a big deal at a certain time of the year in the United States. Kind of went away a little bit, but still out there that could occur. But some of the biggest things is obviously salmonella. Some of the other things that these pests carry. So some of the top 10 findings by in our audits or in our standards by the audits. Pest activity, number 1. Okay, so 4.15, dead or alive. Almost every auditor that's out there, if they look hard enough, can probably find pest activity in the plant. So you're wondering, well, is that an unsatisfactory condition? Is that a serious condition? It depends on where we find it. It depends on the amount of insects we find. It depends on what led to that. Was the plant cleaning, or was there a lack of cleaning? Was it a rotation issue? Okay, maybe they didn't rotate the products properly as far as first in, first out, and that's what caused the issues in the plant. Okay. Interior and exterior monitoring devices. Both rodent catch traps as well as bait stations on the outside. Some of the issues there that I can share on my findings, the traps were damaged. They weren't properly placed. On the outside, the bait stations were damaged where it allowed people that should not have access, unauthorized access to these baits. Monitoring device documentation. They weren't documenting the findings in these traps. They weren't documenting, activity. They weren't monitoring that in the trend activity. And then bird management in and around the facility. So some of the other items that in that top 10 list, ILT monitoring. What is ILT? It stands for insect light trap. So here's kind of an example of one off to the right. You can see this is an old type of trap. And now in most food plants, they have the newer version, which are the, they use a black light, excuse me, and they'll have like a glue board. So what happens is the blue light, so you can kind of see that in this picture, the UV lights attract the insects, they're attracted to the UV light, and then they go and fly to that UV light, and then they get stuck on the glue board. Well, this picture here is of an old type of insect light trap that actually caused the insects, when they come in contact with those electric grids, they would actually explode up to 10 feet. In fact, I had a recent situation in a plant because they had a trap that was too close to the product zone. So the problem is those insects got in there and touched that grid, they would explode, and you were actually introducing foreign material into or onto your products, okay? So ILT monitoring, tracking how much insects, what kind of insects, how close are the traps to the food products. Trend analysis, another one from a documentation standpoint. The issue there is if you're not monitoring the trends, if you're not tracking this information, the next year, you're not going to be proactive. You're not going to think, hey, we had a bee problem last year in September. Hey, we need to kind of be proactive, be ready for that in case that happens this year. Pesticide documentation, or actually facility assessment. This is one of them that I see a lot, where this is typically done by the PCO or the technician's boss. That person comes in to make sure that the technician is doing their job. That comes in to make sure they're checking the traps on a weekly basis, or whatever the frequency is, make sure they're noting the information in the book, the pest control book, make sure the license is up to date, the insurance is up to date. But the facility assessment is another one on the top 10 list, is we find issues with that all the time, okay? And if they do a good facility assessment, they should identify these issues and get that technician to correct his habits and get back on track. Some of the other things we find is pesticide documentation, not tracking all the information. They don't put the EPA number, they don't put the amounts used, where they used it, and that's a violation. Okay, that's a violation in our standards. And again, we've broken down the rules and regulations from 110.35, and we've tried to make it easy for the people to understand, so that it's broken down more in layman's terms. And that's one of them, is just making sure and documenting all that pesticide documentation of where stuff is used. And then the last one that's on the top 10 list is credentials and competencies. I actually found one of these last year, and this one is important. Remember what I said earlier, this is a regulated industry. So last year I was doing an audit close to a bordering state. And the issue that I found was the company was using someone that was licensed from the other state, which is illegal. So they automatically failed the audit right on the spot because of that. I mean, the audit was good, the plant looked great, there was no issues. This was a credential and competency standpoint. They were not following the laws and regs, which was an automatic unsatisfactory. So there's a lot of little things that this doesn't mean that we have to go in and find birds and rodents and insects. Sometimes it's the documentation and some of the paperwork that we find that could be an issue. So let's go through section 4 now, the top 5 findings by requirements in section 4. So in section 4, at the top of the list, which doesn't surprise me, is pest activity. And because a lot of times if we find dead insects in your plant, that may go in cleaning, believe it or not. Okay, the insects were there one time, they died. Now it's a matter of making sure to eliminate them or getting rid of those, okay? But pest activity means we found activity somewhere in the plant, whether it's on the overheads, whether it's on the conveyors, whether it's in some of the raw materials. And all of my colleagues and myself have found this in and around audits. And typically when you find that in the product, that's going to be an unsatisfactory condition, obviously. So interior monitoring is another one of the top 5 findings. They're not monitoring the traps on the frequency that's stated in the contract. Bird management in and around the plant. Most of this time, it's going to be like on the outside of the plant, 99% of the time. Typically, when you find any birds inside the facility, it's going to be an unsat, okay? And I say typically because I have been in a warehouse where I was by the dock door. They opened the dock door, a bird flew in and literally just flew out at the same time. They pretty much startled him. In that case, it would not be an unsat. But again, bird management or in and around the facility, it's birds nesting over dock doors, birds nesting and roosting in areas where the droppings could get into or onto the product. And I have a really kind of interesting slide of why that's an issue as far as kind of the what happens with bird droppings and when it gets into the product and how it affects us as consumers. Pesticide application documentation is another one of the top 5 findings. They're just not taking the time they need to document the information and put the required information in there that's going to be able to defend and explain to an inspector that they're using the pesticides correctly and that they're not putting any food products at risk. And then again, facility assessment, that doesn't surprise me. It's on the top 5. We find that all the time just because it's something that's not done by the technician, it's done by their bosses usually, because it's a conflict of interest if your PCO does your service and then does his own assessment. It's almost like you're rating yourself. But that's another one of the items that we find a lot. And that's very important because a lot of stuff starts with that facility assessment and making sure that the people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So what do these findings tell us? Okay, how many of those issues that I just mentioned, how many of them could have been eliminated with a very good detailed assessment? Does the assessment look at pest activity? Does the assessment look at trending? Does the assessment look at the efficiency of the trap inspections, both interior and exterior and ILTs? I know if I'm doing an assessment, I'm going to look at all of that stuff. And a lot of times an assessment, the boss will go and say, yep, he's got all of his labels and SDS sheets and all the surface reports are there, and he just kind of goes through and checks off the boxes. No, a good assessment will look at the pest activity to ask that PCO, hey, have you communicated this? Have you communicated this activity to the plant? What are the trending telling you? Okay. So one thing I will share with those of you on, make sure that the outside service, if you have a contracted outside service, make sure and take a good hard look at your assessment, the annual assessment that they do. If they want to do it more often than annual, that's fine. But that is very important. And as you can see, it was one of the top 5 items that we find during our audits. So what does a good facility assessment accomplish? Well, they look at internal and external trap activity. They look at historical data, for 12 months or even longer. They look at pest opportunities to see if we've communicated or if they've communicated that to the plant. They look at previously applied corrective actions to see if it's going to be efficient or not, if it's going to actually work and fix the problem. And they also may look at any updates that's going on, any new laws and changes and regulations within the IPM world. How do you review the pesticide application record? Well, making sure it's got the proper name of the material, the brand name, the EPA number, the pest management risk assessment, a specific location of where pesticides were applied, the method of application, okay? What is the target pest? If you look on the labels for pesticides, it will actually have a target pest. Now, this one is kind of rare, but because a lot of times it'll have a long list of different insects that it'll target. But if you're using a pesticide that is not specific for a certain target pest, that could be an issue as well. So pay attention to that. The rate percentage of the application, that is another very, very important one. In fact, you can actually fail the audit if that is not correct. And the reason is that people are just going in there and doing the old glug method and putting the pesticides with water and then spraying. That could be a contamination issue if from a residue standpoint in and around the facility. So the rate percentage of the application or the pesticide is very, very important. Now, you might look at the date and time and think, okay, why is that important and why is that on there? I've actually had plants that they have failed because I looked at the date and time and I tied that to when they were running, and I tied it to when the pest control operator was in the plant. I'll give you a really quick story in one of my small facilities is I was looking at the records and I was doing my review of the records, and I noticed that the pest control operator was there the day before and he was there at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I know this was I believe it was a Wednesday. So I asked them if they were running the day before, which was the Tuesday, and they said yes. And I asked them if they were running at 8 o'clock. And when they said yes, and I looked at some production records, that was an automatic unsat because the pest control operator actually applied pesticides in the kitchen area, and the label clearly stated, I still remember this from about 15 years ago. But anyways, it stated that he used pesticides in the kitchen area. On the label, it stated that you could not use that pesticide where there was exposed or open product. So that is why that date and time is very important, guys. Take a look at that to see when was in the plant and did he apply pesticides when he was not supposed to based on the label direction. And then obviously the printed name and signature of the pest control operator. So how do we pick a company to come in? Do we look at how much they're going to charge us? I know that cost is important, but sometimes you may want to pay a little bit more to get that good pest control company in there that's going to do a right job, okay? So experience is very, very important. Experience in the industrial service. You might want to ask them, hey, do you have any other food or beverage plants that you're servicing? Do you have any plants that are inspected by AIB? That is important because a lot of times they'll say, oh, we know all about AIB. We have a lot of plants under AIB. Yet when I start going through the books, I noticed that they were doing something that is not consistent with our standards. So you got to watch out for those salespeople. Sometimes they'll tell you anything just to get into your plant, and then they get in there and create some problems. So you want to make sure that their technicians are licensed by the state. That's easy to check. They want to make sure they have verifiable GMP training, or you can make sure they're trained on GMPs before they come into your plant. They should be knowledgeable about current regulations. They may have a certified entomologist on staff. The larger companies will have that. Your smaller ones will not. How many years experience does the employee have? And also knowledgeable of the food industry. So these are some of the, it's not required, but just some of the things you may want to check off when you're doing an interview for a pest control company if they're going to service your facility. Now, 99% of the plants that I do have an outside service. Okay, so it's external. You have external resources and connections to experts in specific areas. These are the kind of the pros and cons of that. They have a lot of leverage, expertise from a broader industry knowledge base. The response time could be a problem. You call them, it might take them several hours to get there. Chemicals and supplies are often stored off-site, and there's a shared ownership with that external company. Now, internal, like what I used to do for the snack food company I worked at, I was certified by the state. I could respond very quickly. I mean, literally, I was already at the plant, so literally within minutes, I could take care of an issue. It may require additional controls for chemicals and supplies. I had all of my stuff locked and under lock and key that I was the only one that had access. We owned all the responsibility. Pest management professionals require external training. And again, the only problem with that is if I left the company, which I did, then you have to replace them or hire an outside service. So just kind of the pros and cons of whether you want to go with in-house or external. And I can tell you 99%, if not even more, typically just contract somebody outside because it is a regulated industry and they don't want to have to deal with some of those regulations and stuff. So partnering with the PMP, the pest management professional, and then I'm going to get into the real specifics of birds, insects, and rodents. On occasion, you want to accompany that PMP during the service. You want to go through, not all the time, because you guys are busy and you may not have time to go through with them. But one of the things that I would do, just a little trick, is I would actually put, before I got my license, I would actually put a plastic mouse in a couple of my traps and I would move them. So I would put a mouse in trap number 2 and number 17. Then I would move it to number 22 and number 45. And what I was doing was forcing him to make sure he checked every trap. Sometimes I would only put one, and that way it forced him to check every single one. So that's kind of a trick so that you don't have to accompany him every single time. But if you want to spend the time and go through for 2 or 3 hours, which in some cases it may take, that's fine, but you guys usually are too busy for that, and that's why you hire that outside person to take care of that service for you. Also, you want to be able to get with them to follow up on observations, to correct and correct or eliminate findings during those routine inspections. Want to make sure that they react to the pest sightings, participate in the investigation along with your technician. Maybe help in looking at those customer complaints that may be related to pest activities. They're the experts. They do this every day for a living. So you may lean on them for their expertise if you have a problem, to see if it was something that could have occurred from the plant or if it's something that maybe occurred in a store once you produce your product and send it to a store, which I've seen occur myself before. And remember, the company is responsible for compliance for pest control regulations, not the IPM provider. So that's important. I want to explain that. So when you hire an outside pest control service, folks, remember, you're responsible for their actions. So if they do something that contaminates the product, the FDA or the health department's not going to go after them. They're going to come after you. So make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and you're monitoring and policing them. Also, training, you can actually train them on the GMPs of the plant, so you are 100% sure that they understand that they're in a food plant. So provide training to PCO about the facility's operations. Employees should receive training for the PCO about pest management. Reinforce the goal for controlling and correcting pest control issues. So again, work with your pest management professional. You need to have a really, really good working relationship with them. The better that is, the less chance you have of possibly having issues in and around your facility. So now let's take a look at birds as a pest. So we're going to break this down. What I did is I broke these down into birds, insects, and rodents. And it's a short webinar, and really it's just to kind of wet your whistle, just to kind of give you a taste of kind of pest control, to see, maybe we need to have a little more extensive training. Maybe we need a full day training or whatnot. So birds, now I can tell you, and I've talked to some folks in the industry, when I went to get my license 35 years ago, birds were not even on the list. Birds were not part of the test. And they did not look at birds as far as a pest. Now, when you go and take your pest control license, it is on the list as far as you have to understand birds, you have to be able to answer some questions and whatnot. So they're looking at birds as a pest in and around plants now. So are birds really a pest? Why are they in your plant? What did I do or not do to keep these pests out? How can I legally control bird activity in and around my plant? The reason I put that on there, folks, is there are some birds that are protected. So this is why you go with an outside company in most cases, because they understand which ones are protected, which ones not. You don't want to kill a protected species. It is going to be a major issue if you kill a protected species with baits or whatnot. The picture here, pigeons are not protected, sparrows are not protected, but just kind of a little bit of information there. So here's kind of that little slide I put together as far as the flow of bird droppings and how it impacts us. Now, I can tell you that this is exactly what happened at a plant in Atlanta. They had bird activity in and around their plant on the outside. So there was bird droppings on the outside on the roof. They get a lot more rain in Atlanta than we do here in Arizona. So the rain kind of washed through those droppings, dripped through the roof where they had leaks, got onto the product, as you can see in the second picture up there on the right, or the third picture rather, and then the consumer consumes that product and gets sick with salmonella. And in this case, it was a major, major issue with this plant. And they ended up having some people that got extremely sick, and I believe some people died from contamination. And they tied it back to bird activity around the facility. Okay, so it kind of comes back to how important is it to have a good pest control program in and around your plant. And as you can see here, birds are smart. I mean, they literally, as soon as these people got up from this table, it looked like an outside dining area. These pigeons are up there. Look at that. So you're going to probably clean the plates and the fork and whatnot. But are we really going to sanitize that napkin container? Are we going to wipe down the table and some of the other things that looks like a cutting board there? And so there's a lot of ways of cross-contamination. And this is what the big issue is in and around our plant. If I find any birds in a plant when I do an audit, it's going to impact your score. It's not going to be a minor finding either. So it's a real, real big issue, okay? So birds as pests, some of the challenges. You know, the public perception of birds is that they're no threat to human health and property. That's not true. Public perception is that the control methods are sometimes cruel and sometimes unnecessary, okay? Again, nobody's going to get upset if you kill an insect or a rodent, but people will get upset if you kill a bird, okay? So they're protected, and a lot of people are bird lovers and stuff, and so these are some of the other issues that we have in and around our food plants. Is you have to be careful on how you handle these pests around your plant. And I did call them pests because they are pests if they get into your plant. Control technologies available are somewhat limited and often misapplied. And then a regulatory oversight. Now, I will say that we will be providing and sending this recording of the webinar. And so this information will be there as well as that link there. And I went into that link, and really what it does is just talks about over 60 different diseases that birds carry. So you guys can click on that or go to that website and see that. I don't want to do it because it'll interfere with the webinar, but we provided that so that you guys can go in there and see how the government looks at birds in and around food plants and why they see it as an issue if they come into your plant and find those. So just a real quick deal on birds. It's going to be a significant issue if we find those, just as the same as if we find rodents, okay? So now let's kind of switch a little bit over and go to rodents as a plant. Now, everybody knows that rodents are pests in and around a plant. Nobody really considered birds as a pest. But why do rodents infest your structures? Why do they come into your plant, okay, or your warehouse? Do we know how to look for the signs? What is your internal and external trap records telling you? Now we're going back to those records again. Are you paying attention to the trend analysis, okay? So here's some signs to look for. Droppings, if you're finding droppings. Now I will tell you, this might get a little technical for you, okay? And if you couldn't tell, I really have a passion for pest control or IPM. But there is a way to tell the difference between rodent dropping and cockroach dropping. Cockroach droppings are very similar to rodent droppings. There's a big difference though. I am being serious when I say that if you break the droppings apart, you will find hair in the rodent droppings. You will not find that in a cockroach dropping. And the reason is rodents are constantly cleaning themselves. And so they're licking in their bodies and whatnot, and they're constantly passing, literally over 1,000 hairs in their lifetime through their droppings and stuff. So if you find droppings, guys, you got to take a look to see, is it a cockroach or is it rodent? Because they're very, very similar in size and even in color. Tracks, if you're finding tracks in and around your facility, burrows and runways, grease marks. Rodents, the reason they're always cleaning themselves, they have oil and grease on their bodies and they're cleaning themselves just like we do. If you were to press your forehead against the window and then look at it, you'll see that real fine grease mark. Same thing with rodents, okay? Urine stains, this will need the assistance of a black light. If you got a black light for you and receiving, you want to use that to be able to check those pallets of materials coming in, because it will actually fluoresce. So if you use a black light, you can actually see if it's just a water stain, which will not fluoresce, or rodent droppings, or rodent urine rather. And then presence of live and dead rodents is a pretty good sign that you got rodents around your plant. And then rodent sounds, and obviously rodent odors, okay? This is the problem, folks, is rodents will go and feed sometimes 20 to 30 times a day. So they come out of their burrow, their hiding spot, and they'll go and feed on this box, this bag of flour. And later they come back and they feed on another different bag. And then they come back later and feed on a different bag. So they can literally destroy 20 to 25 to 30 bags of flour or peanuts or any kind of product. And that's where the contamination and the loss of revenue is. So they're a big issue for contamination, as well as some of the other issues that they cause. Here's another sign, okay? So in the bait stations, when you look at a bait block, you can tell if it's insects or rodents. Rodents are constantly gnawing, and the reason they're constantly gnawing is they have to keep their incisors kind of cut down because they're constantly growing, or they'll look like little saber-toothed tigers, okay? So you can see here where rodents have been gnawing on this piece of bread and this, this nut here, okay? And you can actually see that on wires. They will chew and gnaw on wires. It causes electrical shorts and things like that. But it's really easy. And when I do my audits, when I see that, I typically train and educate my plant so that they understand this information, okay? So look for the signs, guys. You have to train yourself to know how to look for these different signs. So what is the problem? What is the problem with having birds in our plant? What is the problem with having rodents in our plant? This is a true picture. This is a picture, a real picture. And I can tell you exactly how this happened. A rodent died, fell in a pan, okay, and the dough went on over the top of the rodent, because they don't check every single piece of dough and every pan for the loaves of bread. So the dough went over this rodent that was dead, went through the proofer, so the dough rose, goes through the oven, and they have suction cups to pick up the entire loaf and put it on a conveyor. So anyways, this rodent is on the bottom of that loaf, so nobody sees it. It goes through the oven, it comes out of the oven, it gets sucked up and put on a conveyor, it goes through the slicer, and that's why I know this is a real picture, is you can actually see where the slicers went right through the rodent. Again, the way, if you're looking at this picture, the dark parts of the bread here, that's called a heel. The top of the bread is called a crown. So the heel of the bread, you can never see that, okay, because it's always on the bottom of the conveyor, and this got all the way to a consumer. Can you imagine if you went to the store and you bought a loaf of bread and this is what you found in your bread? I guarantee you, you would never buy that product again. So how many interior and exterior traps are enough, okay? You know, when you have these interior and exterior traps, folks, you typically have them by doors, any entry areas. It's really up to you, and it's really in that evaluation of how many you need. I've had some plants that have as many as several hundred. I have some very small plants that have maybe 10 or 12. So there's no real set number to say you have to have 20 or 30 or 40. It depends on your evaluation, it depends on your assessment, and it depends on how many doors and entry areas you have into your facility, okay? And there's different types of traps. You can use whatever type you want, okay? There's no regulation, whether it's a tin cat or a catch-all or a mouse master, as long as they do the job, okay? So now let's take a little break into pests, or insects rather, and talk about this. So this is where it's very common in food plants. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they call stored insects and structural insects, okay, and kind of break that down. So why are the insects there? Well, unfortunately, I hate to tell you, folks that are on this call, but sometimes the insects actually come in with the products. The eggs of flower beetles are already in the product. Now, this is a picture of a cockroach. That's not going to be in any product, and it shouldn't be there, and that is an automatic CUNSAT. But some insects actually come right in with the raw materials. Are you looking for the signs? What are your monitoring devices telling you? Are you paying attention to the trend analysis? So why is proper identification important? Well, not all insects found in commodities on packages or in facility can actually feed and or develop on stored products. Separate damaging from non-damaging pests, okay? Stored product pests, such as flower beetles, Indian meal moth, warehouse beetles, cigarette beetles, differ in their food preferences, their ability to develop, and the type of damage that they can cause. So better identification sources and target response is important. Some insects fly, some don't. That's important because if you have Indian meal moths, which fly, if you have cigarette beetles, which are strong flyers in your plant, they can infest your entire warehouse, where red flower beetles or confused flower beetles rather do not fly. Okay, so there's some insects that are not strong flyers. So that's why it's important to understand, what kind of a pest do I have in my plant? Is it a red flower beetle, confused flower beetle? You know, if it's in the product, it doesn't really matter, it's an issue. But the important part here is to understand some of the specifics and characteristics of those pests. So what are the important sources of insects? Okay, well, I think when we're leaving doors wide open and then the people are wondering how the insects get in, that's a GMP issue. It's like, okay, guys, I mean, no duh, you have insects in your plant. You have to educate your employees to let them know, guys, we have to keep our building closed. You don't leave your doors and wide open in your house. You're going to have pests and insects and critters get right into your house. So we're developing and processing food products. The employees need to understand that they have a part in this as well, okay? Here's just kind of a real quick how insects move. You got food patches and population movement. You go from an uninfested patch to an infested patch, and they just keep migrating, looking for food. They go from one pallet to another pallet looking for food, okay? And this is how they move in and around your facility. Here's just kind of a little example of some insects that you can have in and around your facility. So these are with processed commodities. You got Indian meal moth and Mediterranean moth, which is very, very similar. The Indian meal moth is probably the most common. And some of the other ones are the flower beetles, both red and confused. Sawtooth grain beetles, another one. And then you got warehouse and cigarette beetles. Not that common to find spider beetles or the yellow mealworms and things like that. But these are some of the pests that you can have with cereal, flour, pet food. These are milled products, okay? So food facilities can be an ideal for pests. Why? And I believe one of the questions was kind of related to this as far as temperature. And I'm gonna read those two off and then open it up for questions here in just a few minutes. The food facilities can provide resources, food, shelter, water. They can allow access to resources, okay? And they maintain a favorable environment conditions for development. I'm in Arizona, so it doesn't really get cold here. But if you're in Chicago or Wisconsin or the Dakotas, it gets extremely cold there, and those pests are looking to get out from that weather. So a nice toasty bakery or a nice toasty warehouse would be perfect for them to get out of that cold. You have to know where to look, folks. Okay, this is in a basement of a plant. They never went down to this area. You can see it's got dirt floors down there. And so they actually were having a cockroach problem, didn't know where it was coming from. I was actually doing an audit, and this pipe that you can see on the right-hand side of the picture went through the floor, and there was a small amount of daylight by that pipe. And I asked them, I said, where does this pipe go? And they said, it goes down to the basement. And when I looked down by the edge of that pipe, I could see some antenna. And I said, can we go down there? They said, we can, but nobody ever goes down there. And they never did find the cockroach activity until we went down there. And this is what we found, folks. Can you imagine having this in and around your plant or in your house, in your basement, and wondering where they're coming from? Okay. So you gotta look. So what were some of the key takeaways? Okay. IPM is a systematic plan that brings together different pest control tactics into one program. Preventative pest controls and monitoring can prevent the need for chemicals. Now, let me make sure and make this clear. Chemicals still are effective, they work, but it should not be the first means of control. You need to use all the other IPM strategies. And if you're still having problems, then by all means, use the chemicals and pesticides that are available to us, okay? Inspection is a critical element of pest management. FSMA requires documented pest control plan and corrections. So even with FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, there's very specific things that we have to have to control pests in and around our plant, the laws and regs. It talks about that. And the other thing we talked about is you want to create a good working relationship with your PCO. Remember, You want to trust, but verify. Trust what they're doing, but verify, check, challenge. This is what I do as a living. I've done it for almost 30 years at AIB, and I've done it for almost 40 years in the industry. Is you have to go out and verify that people are doing what they're supposed to. You have to verify that IPM professional is doing his job or her job. Because if not, remember whose responsibility is it? It's the FDA is not going to go after your pest control company. They're going to come after you to make sure that you are protecting the products for the consumers. So now what I'm going to do is read off those couple of questions, and hopefully that'll kind of entice you guys to have some other questions of your own. But the couple of questions that we got, first one was, has there ever been any recalls due to pest control? And recalls, whether it's class 1, class 2, or class 3, is kind of like taboo in a food plant. You don't want to have any recalls. And there have been recalls that have been related to pest control. I mentioned the one about the birds earlier, where the plant in Atlanta had an issue with their products when people got sick and died. That was related to birds. There have been other contamination issues, that have been related to pest activity. Okay, but to say that there's been a class 1 recall because they found insects in a product, I haven't seen it. And the reason, again, remember, insects and that type of thing are quality issues. Nobody's going to die if they eat an insect or a fragment of an insect, okay? But there are diseases that go along with mostly birds and rodents, and I'm sure there's also pests that can carry some diseases, okay? Second question, and then I'll open it up to you all, is how does the weather, and they said, you mentioned the weather as far as pests getting in and out of the weather into your plants. How does the weather impact pest activity, and what should we do to prepare for weather changes? Very, very good question. Okay. First of all, yes, the weather does impact activity. In fact, the warmer months, you'll see a lot more activity. So you might think, okay, we're in Chicago or we're in Wisconsin, so we're not going to have any pest activity. No, that is not true at all. Because now it could even be worse because the insects are looking to get out from the cold. So your nice warehouse or food plant could be a perfect environment for them. So what you should be doing is making sure that your plant is buttoned up, that the doors are sealed, and your pest control person is aware that, hey, we're getting into the colder months, so we may have some activity, or we're getting out of the colder months and getting into the warmer months, and now these insects are coming out of hibernation, and pests and rodents and birds don't really hibernate. But anyways, that could be another issue. So those are a couple of really good questions that go right in line with some of the things that I was talking about. So let me see here if there's any other questions. And the first one was, sorry about that, are the slides supposed to be changing? Yeah, we fixed that earlier. So any other comments or questions, folks, on, let me see here, use screen share. Yeah, so nothing there. Just wanted to open that up to see if there was any questions from anybody on some of the stuff that I covered, whether it's insects, birds, rodents. Not seen anything come across. So I will just say, here. Let's see here from Brian. Says, best rodenticide practices for warfarin resistance in mice. You know what you can do on that? Good question, Brian. Is a lot of plants will rotate pesticides because pests will develop a resistance to certain insecticides. Same thing for rodenticides. Now, warfarin, if you guys know what we're talking about, warfarin is actually a blood thinner, okay? And the thing is, they will not build up a resistance to warfarin. They can build up a resistance to bromelain or other chemicals that are in rodenticides. You have about 3 or 4 options, Brian. You've got Talon G, you got Mackie, you've got First Strike soft bait, and some of them may have bromelain, some of them may have warfarin. The question is, do rodents build up a resistance? They really can't, because what warfarin does is it thins the blood. Okay, so what the reason and how it controls the pests is it causes them to bleed to death. I know it sounds kind of gross, but the same thing with warfarin for humans. People that have heart problems actually use warfarin because it thins the blood and it gives them better blood circulation. But if you were to cut yourself and you're taking warfarin, it's just going to sit there and bleed because it doesn't coagulate. Okay, so real good question, Brian, but they really don't build up a resistance to warfarin. They build up a resistance to maybe some of the other chemicals that may be in a rodenticide. So And then it says, if I'm seeing small bugs, is that a fail? It depends on where we're seeing them, Kelly. If we're seeing them in products, yes, absolutely. Okay, let me see the rest of that. I didn't see the whole thing. If I'm seeing small bugs on glue boards, we will now grab a magnifying glass to see if they are the beetles that you showed. These are found in my paper storage areas and are in area treated. I'm only seeing them on the glue boards. Okay, Kelly, there's a lot of different insects. Okay, now I am not an entomologist, but I do identify a lot of different pests. And I will also go ahead and give you, if you guys want to get a pen and paper really quick and get ready, and I'll go ahead and give you my email address. I have no problem doing this. So my email address at AIB is J, so the first letter of my first name, which is Jesse. So J Leal, which is L-E-A-L, J Leal at AIBinternational.com. So if you guys want to send me an email and say, hey, Jesse, just a picture of like the bugs, I can probably tell you, say, yeah, this is a ladybug, this is a flower beetle, this is a cigarette beetle, and kind of give you some information. It's really common to find those insects on those glue boards. Is that a fail if I see them on the glue boards? No, it is not. But what happens, Kelly, is my antenna now go up because I'm thinking, okay, why do we have these insects in the plant and how are they getting them in? How are they getting in? So it is not an unsat, but it's definitely going to get the inspector to start digging a little bit deeper and maybe look a little bit harder to see what kind of pests they are and what's going on in your facility. Good question. But yeah, so if you guys want to send a picture of that, I'd be glad to help and say, hey, Jesse, I was in your webinar and these are the insects we're seeing on our glue boards. You may look at the doors that are right next to that, close to that glue board, Kelly, and take a look at the seals around that. A lot of times there might be insects just getting in out of the cold. The winter's, the weather's changing and they're just trying to get into a warm environment. So it might not be something that might not be interested in your products at all. They're just trying to stay warm or stay cool. So any other questions, folks, on that? And again, I'll reset my email address again. It's jleal, L-E-A-L, at AIBinternational.com. I'd be glad to. I get a lot of emails from customers asking regulatory questions and things like that, and love being able to help any of the folks out. So any other questions? I'll leave it up for a second or so. Okay, anything on birds or rodents? Very good. All right, well, I would like to thank all of you folks for attending. I know it's a short webinar, and hopefully if you guys have any more questions or information, feel free to reach out to AIB. We've got a lot of really good, smart people at AIB on micro, on labeling, on all kinds of things, and regulatory policies and requirements. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If I can't answer it, we definitely have some people in and around AIB that possibly can get that answer for you. So I know you guys are all busy, and I want to thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule, especially on a Friday, to attend the webinar. And hopefully this information is going to help you. And if you guys need some more information, feel free to reach out. So thank you very much. And I think that concludes the webinar. It's right at close to the hour. And you guys have a great weekend. Thank you.